Imagine walking into a cafe, expecting nothing more than a hot cup of coffee and a quiet morning, only to find yourself in the middle of something unbelievable. That's exactly what happened to this man when he stepped into a local diner, hoping for a simple breakfast. What started as a routine visit quickly turned into a shocking encounter with a waitress who clearly had her own agenda. Without warning, she did something that left everyone in the cafe speechless. But what happened next? Well, you won't believe how things unfolded. Sometimes, life throws unexpected challenges our way, and how we respond can change everything. Stay tuned, because this story is about to take a turn you never saw coming. As the man sat down at his table, he could feel something was off. The waitress barely looked at him, her expression cold and distant. At first, he tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just having a bad day. But as he placed his order, her attitude became even more obvious. She spoke in short, clipped sentences, avoiding eye contact, and when she finally returned with his coffee, something unexpected happened. Instead of placing it gently on the table, she tilted the cup just enough for the steaming liquid to spill over the edge. The man gasped, feeling the heat as it splashed onto his hand. The entire cafe went silent, all eyes turning toward them. Was it an accident or something more? The man stared at the waitress, searching for an answer, but what he saw in her face only made the situation even more unsettling. The man wiped his hand with a napkin, his heart pounding, but he kept his cool. He looked around, noticing the uneasy glances from other customers. Some whispered to each other, while others quickly turned away, pretending not to see what had just happened. The waitress stood there, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips, just enough to make him wonder if it was intentional. He took a deep breath and calmly asked for another cup, hoping to move past the moment, but deep down, something didn't sit right. Why had she done that? Was it just a mistake, or was there something more beneath the surface? As he sat there waiting, the tension in the air thickened. A couple at a nearby table exchanged nervous glances, and the manager in the back seemed to be watching everything closely but chose not to intervene. The man felt the weight of the situation growing heavier. Memories of past experiences bubbled up in his mind, but he pushed them aside, determined to handle this with dignity. Still, he couldn't ignore the feeling that he was being tested, provoked even. And the worst part, he wasn't sure what would happen next. The minutes dragged on, and the man could feel the weight of every glance, every hushed whisper around him. He clenched his fists under the table, trying to stay calm, but the tension in the air was impossible to ignore. The waitress returned, this time with a fresh cup of coffee, but her movements were slow and deliberate, her eyes locking onto his with something that felt almost like a challenge. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet. As she set the cup down, their eyes met, and for a split second, he thought he saw something: disdain, maybe even satisfaction. A sudden clatter from the other side of the diner made him jump, and he turned to see another customer knocking over their drink, looking just as uneasy as he felt. Something wasn't right. The man's pulse quickened. Was he imagining things, or was this entire place against him? He glanced at the manager again, but the man simply adjusted his tie and looked away. Taking a deep breath, he reached for his coffee, determined not to let this moment define his day. But before he could take a sip, he heard a voice, sharp and cutting, coming from a table nearby. He turned slowly, his chest tightening, and realized that the situation was about to take a turn no one in the cafe would forget. The voice came from an older woman sitting just a few tables away. She spoke with a sharp tone, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some people just don't belong here," she muttered, stirring her tea with slow, deliberate movements. The man froze, his grip tightening around the coffee cup. He could feel the heat, not just from the drink, but from the stares around him. His mind raced, wondering if he should say something or just walk away. But before he could decide, another voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" A younger man, sitting across the room, had stood up. His voice was firm but calm, and his eyes were locked onto the older woman. The cafe, already tense, fell into complete silence. The waitress glanced nervously at the manager, who shifted uncomfortably but still didn't step in. The man at the center of it all took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of experiences coming back to him in that moment. Was this stranger standing up for him, or was this about to turn into something even bigger? He could sense that whatever happened next would change everything, not just for him, but for everyone in the room. The room stood still as the younger man took a step closer, his eyes fixed on the older woman. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice steady but firm. The tension in the cafe was almost unbearable now, with everyone waiting to see what would happen next. The man at the center of it all remained seated, watching, feeling a mix of gratitude and unease. He didn't come here looking for trouble, but somehow trouble had found him. The older woman scoffed, setting her cup down with a loud clink. "I don't have to explain myself to anyone," she muttered, but there was a nervous edge in her voice now. The waitress shifted uncomfortably, her earlier confidence suddenly wavering. And then, out of nowhere, the manager finally stepped forward. Clearing his throat, he addressed the room, his gaze moving from the man to the waitress and then to the woman. "I think it's time we talk about respect," he said. His voice was calm, but carried an authority that silenced everyone. Just when it seemed like things were settling down, the man stood up. He looked at the waitress, the woman, and the manager, then shook his head slowly. "No," he said quietly but firmly. "I think it's time I leave." The room remained frozen as he gathered his things, the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. As he walked toward the door, the younger man followed him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said, his voice sincere. And then, just as he reached the door, the unexpected happened. The older woman stood up and muttered, "Wait." Everyone turned to look at her. She hesitated, then sighed. "I was wrong." The words hung in the air, surprising everyone, especially the man. He paused, considering them, before finally offering a small nod. As he stepped outside, he realized something. This wasn't just about one bad experience in a cafe. It was about something bigger, about standing up, about being seen, and most importantly, about change. Outside the cafe, the cool air felt different, lighter somehow. The man took a deep breath, letting it all sink in. He hadn't expected an apology, and he wasn't sure if it changed anything, but it was a step. The younger man stood beside him, offering a reassuring smile. "People can surprise you," he said, and the man nodded, realizing that sometimes even the smallest moments could leave a lasting impact. Inside, the cafe slowly returned to normal, but the atmosphere had shifted. The waitress avoided eye contact, and the older woman sat quietly, stirring her tea. The manager, perhaps realizing his own part in it all, watched through the window as the man walked away. As he headed down the street, the man felt something new, hope. He knew the world wasn't perfect, but in that moment, he believed that change was possible, one conversation at a time.